These are some notes from the Bible study on Thursday, the 4th of April, and they're based on Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 to 3. And I'll just read them because there's just 3 verses. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. I'll just read verse 1 again. Let brotherly love continue. The author of Hebrews didn't need to tell his audience to start loving others. God's love flowed out of the Hebrew believers in much the same way as a reservoir of water flows naturally through the pipes of a dam. We read in chapter 10 that these Hebrews stood side by side with their fellow brothers and sisters during times of suffering. They made the effort to show practical support to those in prison, those who depended on others for their every need. However, though the efforts of gravity cause water naturally to flow through a pipe, and though love for others is a natural response to God understanding God's love for us, despite these things, the author of Hebrews knew that sometimes things make us hold back. Just as leaves in a gutter hold back water from naturally flowing, so too certain things make us reluctant to show love. And we'll look at 4 of these things now. We're going to look at the disappointment of love, the demands of love, the division of love, and the distance of love, and how these things can sometimes make it difficult to love others. So firstly, the disappointment of love. Verse 2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. As a rule, I don't cook, so don't expect hospitality from me. But when I did help cook Sunday lunch, age 10, I used to cut the carrots with my sister, and we'd always make the effort to cut one of the carrots into a special shape. So we'd chop the carrots and we'd cut one of them into the shape of a star or something like that. When we were sat at the table, it was always exciting to watch and wait to see who would discover the special carrot on their plate. Would it be Mum or Dad or my sister or me? It was always very disappointing to reach the end of the meal without anyone discovering the specially cut carrot. We'd gone to all that effort, and yet someone ate the special carrot without realizing. You can imagine the Jewish Christians in this letter had experienced similar. They'd gone to the effort to provide bed and breakfast for some passing stranger, which was a common practice in the days before hotels. But because that person was a passing stranger, they'd never discover the good that their acts of kindness had done. After providing bed and breakfast, that passing stranger might have left and delivered Paul's latest New Testament letter to another church. Their hospitality had made a world of difference. Or the stranger might have left their house in the morning and got eaten by a lion in the afternoon. If the former had happened, they'd be motivated to keep making the effort to show love, for their acts of love made a difference in the world. But not knowing the outcome of their actions, well, it can suck the motivation out of us. Why bother? Why make the same effort a second time? Why pray when you never hear answers to the prayer? Why donate money to missionary organisations when you never see the first-hand impact? Why teach children God's truth at a young age when you never see those children ever again? When you don't know the impact your words have had? You know, when we hear about the positive impact our actions or words have had, well, it motivates us to do those things again. When we don't see the impact, our motivation wanes. Of course, we should do good and loving things for the sake of the benefit it is to the other person. But sometimes knowing or hearing the impact can encourage us. But since we sometimes don't know the impact that our actions have, it can be discouraging. And it's into this discouragement that the author of Hebrews speaks these words. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Now this verse isn't here to create speculation about angels it's not there to encourage us to check if the people we have round for tea have wings. But if you did have 2 angels round for supper, do you think the world would let you forget about it? No, if you had 2 angels round for supper, the paparazzi would be at your door and the Daily Mail would be requesting that you give an interview. Tell us your story and we'll publish it on every page. The 21st century tabloids would never forget about such a significant event. And the consistent message of God's word is the same. No act of love goes unnoticed by him. Truly I tell you, Jesus said, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name, because you belong to the Messiah, will certainly not lose their reward. Jesus said in another place, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Then again, in Luke's Gospel, Jesus said, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And then again in Matthew 25, the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Verse 2 also reminds us of how blissfully unaware we are to what God is doing. It says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels, God's messengers, unawares. We are often blissfully unaware of what God is doing in the background. God might be busy organising things of great significance in the background, such as sending angelic messengers on a mission of internal importance. And we do some small thing that, unknown to us, has some significance, some role to play in God's big plans. God simply asks that we obey him in the small things and trust him with the results. So that's the disappointment of love, and now the demands of love. You may have seen Come Dine With Me or Four in a Bed. In Come Dine With Me, a group of strangers compete to be the ultimate party host. In Four in a Bed, bread and breakfast owners visit another B&B and vice versa, and they each rate the other's B&B. In this version of hospitality, it's all about impressing your guests with lavish meals. However, hospitality in the first century was different. It was more about sharing your house and home to a passing stranger in the days before travellers had hotels. Someone would arrive in need, and you either interrupted your evening plans and put an extra plate on the table, or you closed the door. But the author of Hebrews reminds us, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. You can only neglect something that is your own. For example, you can neglect watering a houseplant, or you can neglect your toenails, or you can neglect your garden. You can only neglect something that belongs to you. In verse 2, God instructs us not to neglect the needs of strangers. In other words, God calls us to treat the needs of others as if their need is our own, as if their need belongs to us. In the book of Galatians, Paul writes, "Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ." We're to treat the needs of others as if they are our own. And such concern for the needs of others naturally leads to sacrifice, and such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Hebrews 13 verse 6 reads, "Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." A sacrifice is not giving somebody a slice of your cake. A sacrifice is giving someone a slice of your slice of cake. The first example says, "I'm concerned about your needs as long as my needs are met." The second says, "I'm concerned about your needs, even if it involves eating in to my own." It's the second, the sacrificial acts, that please God. They please God because when we make such sacrifices, we reflect the perfect sacrifice of His Son, and we show that we understand and appreciate the sacrifice that He made for us. As it says in verses 12 to 16, "So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through His own blood. Through Him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that acknowledge His name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." That's the disappointment of love. That's the demands of love. Now thirdly, the division and love. The Gallagher brothers, Liam and Noel Gallagher of Oasis. The Gallagher brothers have done everything on the list to end their relationship with one another. Yet, in basically every interview I've seen of both Liam and Noel Gallagher, they are constantly asked if they are ready to put their differences to one side. I find this amazing. Nobody asks Brad Pitt about Jennifer Aniston, his ex-wife. No one asks Tom Cruise about his ex-wife, Katie Holmes. No one asks Gwyneth Paltrow about her ex-husband, Chris Martin. The tabloids just accept that their relationship has ended, and once the gossip is dried up, they just let the divorced couple move on. Yet even secular people recognise that when brothers fall out, the issue should not be left to fester. Friendships end as people move on. Marriages end via death or divorce. Work relationships last only as long as your contract. Fewer of those at your wedding will be at your funeral. But the relationship with a sibling, generally speaking, continues from birth to death, even though sibling relationships are far from perfect. Even secular people recognise that when brothers fall out, the issue should not be left to fester. It's sad when it happens. It's sad when the brothers and sisters fall out. It's sadder still when the issue is left to fester. And therefore we should do everything in our power to let brotherly love continue. As Paul said in the book of Romans, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. When there is division between us and another Christian brother or sister, we should do everything in our power to let brotherly love continue. We should be working towards peace, forgiveness, and extending grace to the other party as much as possible. So that's the subject of division and how that can sometimes make love difficult. Now we're going to look at the distance of love. Distance can often make it difficult to show love. Out of sight, out of mind, off my prayer list. That's often how it works. There also might be an emotional distance between us and somebody else. They are feeling things that we are not. They might be sorrowful, but we are full of joy. Or they might be happy, but we are sad. And that can make it hard for us to connect with them and appreciate what they're going through. The following verses call us to address these challenges head on. Verse 3. Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. Eddie Lyle, one of the key people in the Christian charity Open Doors. Eddie Lyle was challenged to take this verse as literally as possible on the first day of his job. On his first day, a parcel containing a letter and a pair of shoes arrived on his desk. He records, "The shoes were sent to me by a pastor in Orissa who'd seen his father macheted to death. His letter asked me to put myself in his shoes and walk with him, to pray for him and tell his story." Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them. In your imagination, pick yourself off your seat, squeeze through the bars of that Iranian or North Korean prison cell, and sit yourself right next to that other believer. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they concerned about? Remember those in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Remember those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. In your imagination, pick yourself off your seat, put yourself in the body of that person, and think about the impact that mistreatment might have had. What do you want people to pray for you in those circumstances? We are in the same body as Christian believers abroad who are persecuted, oppressed, and mistreated. We are in the same body as these people. And so, as Paul says in the book of Corinthians, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honoured, every part rejoices with it. Therefore, we are to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. One way you can do that is through accessing the Open Doors World Watch List. You can either get it online, you can get a hard copy, or you could subscribe to their YouTube channel because they do prayer news updates every couple of months. By doing that, you will better understand what it is like to be a Christian in these countries, and therefore you'll be better able to pray for them, and you might get motivated to support them in practical ways as well.